All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings and welcome to this joint DCMI Assist webinar. I am Ana Alice Batista, the Chair-elect of DCMI. It is my pleasure today to introduce the joint webinar series and today's presenter and topic. The joint DCMI Assist webinars are presented as a service to members of DCMI and Assist and to guests. The purpose of the joint series is to advance the discourse and practices of innovative metadata. Our presenter today is Mariana Malta. Mariana is an electrical engineer and a doctor in information systems. She is an associate professor at Polytechnic of Oporto, Portugal. Currently, she is on leave in the Lab of Innovation in Digital Humanities in Madrid, Spain, where she is developing a metadata application profile for the European poetry under the Postdata project. Today's webinar is on the topic of Me4MAP, a software engineering-based method for developing metadata application profiles. Me4MAP is the result of Mariana's PhD thesis. She and other colleagues are now working on its wide validation process. You will have an opportunity to ask the presenter questions near the close of the webinar. There is a panel on the right of your screen to enter the text of your questions. We ask that you wait to enter your text until near the end of the webinar. I will moderate the questions and answers. We will address as many questions as our time allows. With that, I'll turn the podium over to Mariana.
Hi to all. First of all, I want to thank DCMI and Annalise Batista for this invitation. It's for me an honor to be here and an opportunity to share with you all the work I have done during my PhD, as Annalise already said. So, as Annalise already said, this first slide it's no need now. I just wanted to see where Portugal is in Europe, since this is a worldwide webinar. So Portugal is in Europe. We are next to Spain, but we are not Spain. Most of the times people confuse Portugal with Spain. In Portugal we speak Portuguese, and my PhD analyst was my supervisor. So this method has been developed. We started it, I would say 6 years ago. We started thinking about it, and Annalise, being a supervisor, is also an author of the method, of course, because she did she had a lot of work with me, in fact. So this method, we started, it has, as Annalise already said, a perspective of the software engineering, and we started, he has a starting point, that is the DCMI guidelines, so the DCMI guidelines, RUP, so the Rational Unified Process, and the Singapore framework that probably all of you know. It also is based in a lot of studies and reading and knowledge base from early stages, so the data modeling of software development processes. Also, I have done the state-of-the-art, or I have established the state-of-the-art on methods for the development of application profiles, more formalized or less formalized application profiles. And also I had the opportunity to interview 3 people that were that also developed application profiles, and they gave me a lot of input on their experiences. So this means that Me4MAP is not really, it's something that has a ground and we didn't actually invent anything. We just collected information from different sources and built a method. So, as I already said, it has a software engineer perspective. We don't want to give an universal solution. That would be a bit odd. Of course, there are so many other views of things depending on where you come from. So we give this software engineer perspective, and our intention actually is really to establish a starting point for study and design of methods for the development of application profiles. So maybe we should start by defining what do I mean by a method. A method is a selection of techniques. It's how we control the use of these techniques, and how we integrate the results that the activities in the method result, right? So Me4MAP defines a path in time that we should follow. So it defines the activities we want to develop, when these activities may take place, how they are interconnected, and which artifacts they produce. So artifacts like, I can give a very easy example, the functional requirements. It also defines kind of an ideal work team, okay? This is the ideal work team, meaning that maybe in real life, it's not really possible to have all these main roles in each project. And it's important to say that there is not necessarily a one-to-one correspondence between roles and persons, meaning that a role may be performed by several persons and the person may perform several roles. So the first role I would say it's Me4MAP defines is the project manager. And I don't think that I need to explain what a project manager is, but I may say that a project manager, apart from all the things we know a project manager says, like assuming a global view of the project through a detailed context interaction with the participants, either external or internal, a project manager should have a scope vision of the organizations and of the goals of these organizations that want to achieve with this application profile. Then the next role would be the system analyst, that should have two expertise. First, should have technical skills in requirement elicitation and data modeling, and second, should have basic knowledge in management, should be able to understand in detail the application domain, and should perceive the real motivations and relevance of the requirements. So the second part probably it's something that we don't pay attention. We think that a system analyst is a data modeler and an expert in requirements elicitation. We forget that it's very important that this system analyst has kind of empathy or understands the context. Otherwise, we can have problems. Then the next role would be the semantic developer. That should be a metadata designer or developer that understands, of course, the semantic web concepts and has knowledge in the resource description framework, RDF, of course. I think this is obvious. Then the next is the technical editor, is the role in charge for all the documentation of the application profile. This person should have skills in technical writing writing and knowledge of the application context. Of course, this is also a bit difficult since we might want someone that is a good technical writer and then it's someone that doesn't know anything about the context. Again, in all roles, everyone should have knowledge on the context. Then the application domain expert, that should be a specialist in the context, of course, and have a top vision of the context domain. It is also recommended that this role person or persons are final users of any tool that in the future will be based on the application profile. Then the last but not the least, the final user. By final user, so final user, we can see several potential types of final users. They might be the programmers of the applications that will make use of the metadata application profile, the people that feed the system, people that consume information from the system, and of course automata in general that execute discovery function of the semantic web. So the person or persons fulfilling this role should bring relevant information regarding his or her day-to-day experience. So for large application profile developed projects, Me4MAP defines a core team, which may be comprised of the persons with technical skills, that is, the system analyst and the semantic developer. At certain times in the development process, only the core team may be in charge of the work. But the work of the core team should, however, be validated by the entire team that Me4MAP calls the extended team. So this is all about the work, the ideal work team. Of course, as I said previously, for instance, a system analyst and semantic developer those roles can be performed by one person if the project is not that big. Or a technical editor can be also a project manager, I don't know. It depends on the skills of the persons that are part of the team. So this I've already said. So as I said previously, the starting point for one of the starting points of the Me4MAP was the Singapore framework for Dublin Core application profiles. And the Singapore framework says that an application profile is a kind of a set of documents where we define the functional requirements, where the domain model is defined, where the description set profile is written, and then those three are obligatory, and then where we have syntax guidelines and usage guidelines. These two, they say it's optional. So this was the starting point. As you can see, every item of this list has a number afterwards. Those will be numbers that will appear in a graphic afterwards. So how are we going to start? How am I going to explain you the method? I use diagrams with two levels. Level 1, 0 and level 1. So level 0 are less detailed, and level 1 details composite activities defined in the diagram 0. For instance, the one you are seeing now shows all the top activities, the main activities that Me4MAP defines. Then you can see S1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that correspond to the the previous slide, and that have as outputs the Singapore framework deliverables. So functional requirements, domain model, and so on. So each Singapore stage, as I call it, is a composite activity and results in a Singapore component. In order to help the reader, the composite activities are identified in the diagram level 0 with an asterisk. I don't know if you can see it because it's a bit small, but there's an asterisk there. So it means that S1 and 2 will have inside other activities, and we'll see it further. Okay. I want also to say that some of the activities take place in parallel, as you can see, and others sequentially. But the life cycle of this method is evolutive, adaptive, meaning that at any moment the work team can go back in the planned activities to verify and modify any developed deliverable, providing the dependent activities and their deliverables are revisited accordingly. It is a highly iterative process. The number of iterations depends on the dimensions and complexity of the application profile under development, as well as on other factors such as the experiences of the team. The iterations end when there are no more new things to be made or add as a result of the, as we will see next, tests and validation activities that are included in the activities of Me4MAP. Okay? So all the mandatory deliverables have to be developed, but it's true that pre-existing work may be used and the process may move forward to the next stage. So since the development of an application profile is being, well, it should be done and with several organizations, probably those organizations have already some kind of deliverables done before, because they have done it already for other activities in the context of the organizations. Okay, so let's start by A1, which is the development of the glossary. It's common that the organizations, the development of an application profile, it's something that is done within different organizations, probably worldwide, and there are many types of different persons that are part of the team. Especially they are multidisciplinary teams, as we have seen in the work team. We have technical people, we have management people, we have people from the context, probably people of sociology, I don't know, depending a lot on the context. Since we have these multidisciplinary teams, it is important that team members use a common vocabulary of key terms in order to avoid misunderstandings and improve communication. Personally, I advise that we take very seriously the glossary, because the worlds of engineering, for instance, and the worlds of poetry, for instance. Now I'm working in a project where I'm doing the modeling of poetry and metrics of poetry. I don't know anything about poetry. Of course, we read poetry, but we don't study poetry. So the first months were not easy to communicate with philologists. They are different from an engineer. So I really said to everyone, we need a glossary to understand what we are talking about. So a glossary, it's a list of terms and its definitions, okay? And it's, how do we do it? Every time there is a bad communication, people don't understand each other, it's there that we should stop and say, okay, this is a key term, we need to decide what it means. And the team agrees on a definition of the new key term, and for instance, we can use a tool, a web tool, where we can insert the text. Everyone should participate in the glossary, and the project manager is the responsible to arrive in a good term. After, I'm going to talk, so the glossary, as we saw previously, it's something that you should do during the whole process of the development of the application profile, but as it is logic, it is more intensive in the beginning. Then the documentation of the application profile is also something very important. It is something, it's simply to record the results of the development process and also the justification of the choices made. This is fundamental since the documents produced will help some application profile users, such as app designers or programmers, to apply the properties and classes correctly to the specific context. It also ensures that future application profiles developers understand the development process used during the application profile. Okay, so at the same time we are doing our work of the development of application profile, we should also write about it and how things are being done. And it should be done by all, since all are working. Of course, the technical editor is the responsible, and in the end we'll have a good, hopefully, documentation. So now let's talk about the first stage, developing the first functional requirements. This is a composite activity, and here we have 5 different activities that have to be done inside the developing the functional requirements Singapore stage. The first one is the definition of the vision. The second, the development of the work plan that is done in parallel with the definition of the application domain. The fourth is the elicitation of the high-level requirements. And the fifth, the development of the use case model. As you can see, the use case model is also a composite activity. So the development process starts by defining the vision of the project, unless a suitable vision developed by previous management team already exists. So a vision is a document that states what developers want to achieve with the map development, and that defines the scope of the map. The result may be a simple document with a clear and accurate view of the vision. So this vision should be done through, for instance, a brainstorming where you put everyone in a room and people discuss what they want to achieve with a map. And in the end, you define the project, the project manager will write a text and people will discuss the text and will arrive to a final version. Then we have in parallel the work plan, and I think I don't need to talk a lot about the work plan, since every project needs a work plan, right? And the application domain. So the definition of the application domain has as goals to understand the scope of the application profile and define the boundaries of the application profile. And this second, the first and the second are important, but the second one, it's so important because we want to embrace the world. So we need to put boundaries to what we really want to, what information or what world we want to capture in order to define a model, right? An informational model. And so we study the domain, and then we are the application domain expert should define exactly what world he wants to capture. So this can be done by a study of the literature or documental sources. It also can be done by visiting events organized by the entities of the application context, and also talks to or observation of application domain specialists through techniques such as interviews or direct observation. This, of course, is done by the application domain expert, and then it should be done by everyone, but the application domain expert is the one that is responsible by this activity. In the end, we'll have a report with the application domain. Then the next activity is the elicitation of high-level requirements, which is a list of the functional and non-functional requirements is expressed by the work team members. So this document should provide a very short description for each requirement. It's like a starting point. What kind of searches we want to do? Oh, I want to search by author. I want to search by type of whatever. Simple things. And it can be done by the same way we define for the vision. So everyone should work on this, and the system analyst is the one that is responsible. In the end, we have a document with the high-level requirements. Then we go for the activity, which is the definition, the development of the use case model. This development of the use case model has two activities. The general use cases, which is a definition of the use case diagram, and the detailed use cases, which is a definition of the detailed use cases. Okay, the first one, it's a use case diagram, and this is very well defined in literature. The ones that come from the software engineer world know probably better than me what is a use case diagram, and that presents the actors that interact in use cases and describe the functionality of the system. So use cases offer a systematic and intuitive means of capturing functional requirements. Okay, so in order to know how to build a use case diagram, there is a literature about that, and it's not the scope of this presentation to talk about that. This is something that it's very technical, so the system analyst is the responsible, and we'll have the help of everyone to define this all the use cases. And then the detailed use case. Every use case should be detailed. And again, you have the documentation on how to do it. I should say that in some cases, as I have said before, maybe there are certain activities on this stage that they will not be performed since teams can resort to documentation that already exists, for instance, or For instance, if there are already databases or websites that are served by databases or information, or in a better way, web-based information systems that are served by databases, the team can study those databases. So they probably will not need to do some of these activities, or they can do, but in a lighter way, since they can resort to work that has been done previously. So going back to the first diagram, now we can go for the developing the domain model, which is the second main activity. As we see here is also composite, so the developing the domain model is composed of three main activities. The first one is the definition of the domain model that will give the output the domain model. Domain model is a data model. The second one is the definition of the domain model test criteria. And finally, the third one is the application of the domain model test. So the first activity it's the definition of the domain model, that is a data model that describes what things your metadata will describe and relationships between those things. So the domain model is the basic blueprint of the construction of the application profile. In fact, it is a very, very important moment. It identifies the entities and their relationships and the entities' attributes, for instance, data types and other attributes with literal values. So this domain model is based on the functional requirements that were described previously. How do you do a domain model? So you rely on the functional requirements, or if you think that you can rely only in documentation or databases that you already have, you can do it. I can give an example that I'm in this moment defining a domain model for European poetry of different times, moments in time, of different moments in time, since Middle Ages until modernity. There are 25 at least web-based information systems with data of all this. So what I'm doing is analyzing all the data models I have, but also in order to help me, since some of the data models are very badly done or have no documentation or are not documented, I'm also analyzing the web interfaces in order to understand the functionalities the interfaces have, so that I can extract, in a way, the data needs for those functionalities to work, right? So in fact, I'm not really doing the high-level functional requirements, and I'm not really doing the use case model, even though when I'm analyzing the function, the websites, I am in a way extracting of that use cases, right, from each functionality and so on. But in the end, I will not have the as I said here before. Let's go back here. I'm not defining the use case diagram at all. Okay. So as you see, depending on the cases, you can modify a bit the method. So we were here. So typically this activity is done by the core team because it's very technical. and it's led by the system analysts. In the end of the activity, we're going to have a domain model, which is a mandatory Singapore stage component. Okay. Then we need, in a way, to test the domain model. So the definition of domain model test activity defines a way or a model to test if the application profile supports the functional requirements. So the team has to verify if the attributes that were chosen on the domain model, so the properties that were chosen and the constraints that the properties have, support the functional requirements defined previously. Okay, so how do you do this? It's not easy, since application profiles are essentially intangible, right? So users cannot interact with them directly. The same happens to other models or components of the application profile as the domain model. So the use of paper prototyping technique is one example. I am validation in my project that I'm doing that now. The validating process, I have several steps of validation actually. So it's very iterative. So I have 2 or maybe 3 moments for validating the domain model, and I have done already the first validation. And what I did was to meet all the, well, not all, I think 90%, I could meet 90% of the databases I used to define a first model, and I gave them testing sheets where they can fill in, try with their own resources of their databases, fill in an Excel sheet with information and with the properties and what were the values of the properties. So they could see if that model fulfills their need of their data. So it depends a lot on the context also. So finally, we do the test, right? So the test is we just ask end users to do the test. In the end, we'll have a report with the results of the model. So in my case, after the first validation, I wrote the several problems that the people had filling the sheets, and I incorporate them in a new version of the model. So now we go for A3, which is the environmental scan, and it is developed in parallel with other activities, as we can see there. A3 starts at the same time as developing the domain model and continues in parallel with other 2 activities of S3, developing the description set, and I'm sorry, I'm lost now. Yes, so it should be done at the same time as the vocabulary alignment and the constraint matrix. Okay, so S3, as you can see here, is composed of several activities, but we have the environmental scan that is done at the same time as these 2 activities. It starts here at the same time with S2, and it ends with the constraint matrix. We'll see what this is. Now, let's see what is the environmental scan. The environmental scan is a report that contains a review of the metadata schemas that are available in any serialization of the semantic web. When I talk about metadata schemas, I can also say RDF vocabularies, okay, or ontologies. There are some ambiguities on all these terms, but they all in a way, they don't really mean the same, but I use the metadata schema word because I think it's more clear. So we choose the metadata schemas that may serve the needs of domain model deliverable. So how do we do this? Well, we need to search, look for that in some registries that we already know. For instance, the whole metadata registry, the linked open vocabularies registry. We also have the Bartok and probably many others. We just need to do an exhaustive search with some method in order to understand what metadata RDF vocabularies or metadata schemas can answer to the needs of the domain model. And we can organize all that in a document, either a spreadsheet or whatever. Of course, it's the semantic developer, the only one that can do it, and in the end we'll have a report. So after that, we have the developing the description set activity, DS3, and this activity has 4 main activities, and one of is Composite 2. So the first one is the definition of the vocabulary alignment. The second one is the definition of the constraints matrix. The third, the constraint matrix test, and the last one is the encoding of the description set profile. It's in a way the programming of the application profile. So the first one is the vocabulary alignment, and this vocabulary alignment matches the terms of the metadata schemas that were identified in the environmental scan. I'm sorry, it's a difficult word, with needs of the domain model. So we identify each attribute and we match them with the terms of the metadata schemas. It is possible that the team may identify more than one metadata schema property per domain model attribute. Okay, it is possible. However, at the end of the development of this activity, only one has to be chosen. That property will be the one included in the constraints matrix, which is the activity that comes next. Note that some properties may not be present in the schemas previously identified in the environmental scan, but that may be present with adequate semantics in other schemas of other application domains. Also, for generic properties, the team may prefer to use cross-domain schemas, such as DC terms. And here, it is important to say that when we are defining, when we are doing this alignment, right, even before in the environmental scan, we should try really to use metadata schemas that are standards, or if not standards, because probably standards we only have one, which are DC terms, but very intensively used by others, because the more we use known vocabularies, the more interoperable we'll be with other worlds, right? And if we want to define a new vocabulary, because we cannot find because there are some properties may not be present in the schemas, we should really think if we can compromise a little bit in the semantics in order to be more interoperable. So this is a game between a lot of semantics or a lot of interoperability. So we have to play with that. So this is the core team will do this, but the semantic developer is the responsible. In the end, we have the vocabulary alignment. So for instance, we have here an example of what a vocabulary alignment could be, where we have a property or an attribute called name, and a name of an organization. We call it initiative, but it was an organization. We can use, for instance, DC terms, title, or good relations name. In the end, we decided to use good relations name because this was the context of economy, actually, not e-commerce, because it was not the capitalist economy, it was the social and solidarity economy. But in order to become a little bit interoperable with the capitalist economy, we chose in fact an ontology that defines the a property name for an organization. So we have other examples, right, that you can see. So you define the property of the domain model, you define the, so you have the property of the domain model, its domain, then you have the, the metadata schema that you can use, 2, 3, 4, 1, whatever. For instance, here unit, we only found good relation has unit of measurement, for instance. And then we put here the name of the property. Okay. So the next activity is the definition of the constraints matrix. So depending on the vocabulary alignment, it's the deepening of the vocabulary alignments. Okay. It is detailed. It is the detailed definition of each attribute or entity of the domain model by means of its constraints through the identification of the metadata schemas, vocabulary encoding schemes, or syntax encoding schemes. So we provide a template, okay, where we can see that we can fill the lines. In the first table, we have an identification of the namespaces used. And I think my time is, I need to go faster, I'm sorry. So I just realized that the time has passed. So very fast, this table has, is organized by domain, and each line you represent the label of the property, the range, and then other constraints that you might put to the property. And in the end, you just put some words where you explain what it is. So you are already starting doing your usage guidelines. Then we go for the test of this matrix. So this matrix should be tested, and should be tested where you you have three activities, two in parallel. The first one is the process of application of the map in development to a set of sample resources. So this is an example of the template you can use. Then you define a questionnaire that afterwards you will give to those to those that have made this checking, in order for you to assess how it went. If it went very well, which are very bad news, or if it went well, and if it didn't went very, what problems you had, and if you had problems, probably you need to go back and redefine a little bit your domain model. Okay. Finally, you have the encoding of the discretion set profile. You just need to go and look for the, and probably now you could use another languages either than that's not DSP. You could for instance use the shapes constraint language SHALC under development by the RDF Data Shapes Working Group of the Worldwide Consortium. Finally, you have the developing of the syntax guidelines, which is describes any application profile specific syntaxes or syntax guidelines, and it's done by the semantic developer, and the development of the uses guidelines that you start doing already when you are defining the constraints matrix, and where you explain really what property means and what kind of constraints they have. Finally, just to finish, the validation in production occurs at the end of the application profile. The work team should set the goals of the whole process and decide if this activity is in or out of scope. If the results determine changes in the application profile, and if the application profile has not yet been released to the web, all the developed components and deliverables should be changed accordingly with new versions. The whole process should be conveniently documented. If the application profile is already in production on the web, no changes should be made, since semantic web applications have many interactions and many implications for other systems. Changes to the application profile are a delicate task to manage, since there is a likelihood that such changes will negatively impact all instances. These changes should be planned in advance, discussed thoroughly within the application profile community to mitigate or minimize impact on existing application profiles instances. Upgrades are admissible where they represent an enlargement of the scope of the application profile and do not negatively impact what already exists. So this validation in production validates the application profile, and I already said changes should be very well controlled. And it can be done using a log registration technique or observing final user working with the system that has implemented the MAP application profile. And it should be done by the semantic developer. So we arrived at the end of all activities, and you can see in the slides all the references I have made, and you also can see, unfortunately, the Me4MAP is not yet published. We submitted to a journal already half a year ago, and we are waiting for a peer review result. Hopefully it will come soon. So I thank you for your attention. I'm sorry if I took too much time, and now I'm glad to answer your questions. I just want to say one more thing before I give the floor to Annalise, is that Me4MAP, I myself have already validated it once. I'm again using it in my project here in Madrid, where I'm working now. But I would love very much to have feedback from people that will use Me4MAP in order to improve what exists. Okay, thank you very much, and please, Annalise, go forward.
Thank you, Mariana. That's fine. That's fine.
I'm on time.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Don't worry. I'd like to tell the audience that you can put your answers in the system. In the meantime, I will ask you, Mariana, in case people want to use Me4MAP on their own, the development of their the application profiles that they are doing, can they expect any help from you?
That is a very good question. I would be very happy to help everyone. But it depends on the time that takes me, since I'm employed, right? But I would be very happy to help, of course.
Okay, thank you. Not any question yet. I will ask you something more. Do we need to follow all the activities of Me4MAP? Because it seems a bit complex for small projects, and or for, you know, sometimes we engage in projects that, well, some parts some parts or even the whole activities are already developed. For instance, the vision, what we want from the application profile, etc. Do we need to follow all the activities, or can we skip some?
Well, I mean, in a way, we don't need to follow. We follow what we want. As you said, and I also said, there are some activities that probably are already done. Maybe the application domain definition, it's clear for the application domain expert, and he has already done it. And the vision, it's clear for the project manager and just needs to discuss it in a 1-hour meeting. So maybe some of the activities will not take too much time. Other activities, as I said, depend a lot on the context and on the dimension of the project. especially the first activity, the activities of the functional requirements of the developing of the definition of the functional requirements may be skipped if you can resort in other things. Like in my case now, I'm sorry, I have so many databases that so many people already have gave a thought on how to model this context that I'm not going to do the use case model. So people may think that to validate, it's too much validation, but I say that you should validate, because it's the way you have to be sure, or at least a little bit sure, that your model will be okay. Okay, so you shouldn't skip the validation moment. I think people have the temptation. I don't know if you can say that, a tentação, the temptation of not validating because they think they are doing a very good job. But to use final users and people that really know about the context and how they and what are the informational needs they have of it, you should really resort to those persons. I have done that, and it was very, very, very interesting and enlightening. It was really, really good, and in the end I was happy that I did it, because it gave me a very good feedback, not only of the things that were not okay, because there were some things that needed to be tuned, but also to be sure that I was going in the right direction, and that was also important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was very interesting that you talked about validation, because I was going to ask you something related to validation, and for you to say what, if in your opinion it is so much important. We have already 3 questions here. We have one from Stephanie Hull that says, she's asking, could you please give an example where Me4MAP has been used? How long does it take?
Hi, Stephanie. I hope you are well. I'm the only one, as I said, that I have used. The thing is that Me4MAP was not yet really published, right? I have 2 papers, as you probably know, but they were not final versions. They were versions used They were papers used to discuss with the community and to have feedback. So it is not known. I have used I'm sorry, I need to drink water. When I developed Me4MAP, it was with design science research methodology. So at the same time I was defining Me4MAP, I was also developing an application profile. So maybe that thing doesn't count because I started it without knowing what Me4MAP was going to be, right? So now it's the first time I'm using it here in Madrid. I'm developing a application for a profile for the European poetry. It's a context that has to do with poetry and poetry metrics. And as I said, I have 25 databases that have data about poetry. They are relational databases and they have web-based information systems, and that is my starting point to define the application profile. So in a way, I have learned a lot, of course, already, and I have another vision of what Me4MAP is, and I really want to validate Me4MAP, and not me, Mariana, because I'm a bit how can I say it? I was the one that did it, so it's a bit viciado. How do you say it, Annalise?
Addiction. You are not. It's not
No.
like you are so used to it. You want to say that you are so used to it that it's hard for you to validate it.
Mm. So I would love very much anyone to validate it. The truth is that I need to set in place a formal validation for Me4MAP. So how do you validate a method? An intangible thing, right? Because to validate a software is very easy. You just, well, there are techniques I don't need to explain. But a method, I need to think in a way, I have to look for information on how methods can be validated. So if I found someone to validate method, I will have to give that person a setting that where she can give me a proper feedback. And I'm not ready for that yet. I don't know if I answered Stephanie's question, actually. I think I went further.
Has been used. How long does it take?
How long does it take? It depends on the dimension of the project. So the first time it took me, I would say 1 year, 1 year and a half. Now I think it will take me a year, 1 year and a half to, yeah, maximum.
So another question.
But I'm alone, right?
Yeah. Another question from Stephanie Hull is, what is an advantage of Me4MAP over the Singapore framework? Why is the Singapore framework not sufficient?
Mm-hmm. So the Singapore framework doesn't explain the techniques. I think, well, as far as I see it, I think there are two different things. The Singapore framework is not a method. It's a description of what is an application profile. As far as I know, I hope I'm not saying Betty's nonsense here. Also doesn't explain the techniques, doesn't give you the team, doesn't explain how you can how activities interact. What else? Who should develop each activity? And there are many activities, and actually doesn't describe activities, it describes the deliverables, and that's it.
We have another question from Ingrid. I'm sorry, Ingrid. I'm not sure I will be able to say your name correctly, but it's Ingrid CE. And she tells, please tell us if Me4MAP can be used to support the generation of linked data. If so, do you have examples to share?
Well, generation, I don't understand very well the question, but as far as I understood it, Me4MAP defines a way for you to define the model, the semantic model in which your data will be structured. That's it. Generation of linked open data, it's something you do it with the software. To generate that data, you need a model, a data model, right? And that's what the application profile does. More than a data model, it does the semantic model. In a way, it does the data model and it matches with matches and mixes with vocabulary terms. I don't know if I answered the question.
I have another question from Kim Taylor that says, I am particularly interested in how Me4MAP might be used for literary collections and would like to know if it is possible to follow the poetry project on which you are currently working. Thank you.
Well, of course, you just send me an email and we are in contact. It would be very interesting to share with you what we have done. It's true that our poetry project, I would not call it like that, but okay. The project I'm working in, it's a project that comes from a grant, that it's an European Research Council grant, won by Elena González Blanco, and one of the how do you say, dimensions of the project is the need to share, okay, data. And we know that Singapore Framework says that in order for data to be interoperable in linked open data, you need to develop a metadata application profile. So that's why we are doing it. And it's true that in our domain model, we have a lot of bibliographic data. It's true, books and names of authors, titles, types of whatever, but we also have many other things. So there, we can say that some of the domain model will be easy to sort out because it has to do with libraries, and that is a world that is already very well developed, right? But it has also things that have to do with manuscripts and witness in a manuscript and different kinds of sources and scribes, copyists, and other things. Okay, so you have my email on the screen, so you can write me an email and we are in contact. I would be very happy to share with you what I have been doing.
Another very interesting question from Martha Askander that reads, can you talk about how to test the data model with end users without focusing too much on the interface?
So I have done it with Mind, right? How can I explain? It's difficult without showing you. So my model, it's huge, has many properties. I don't know how many, but I would say 300 properties, whatever. Now we are trying to simplify it, but it's really huge. And the final users, actually, that we were 12 or 13 in a room. Everyone had a laptop, and what I did was a mapping. So I had in Excel, and in an Excel sheet, I had the model of their databases. I don't know if I told, these 12 people on the first validation of the domain model were delegates of the repertoires, digital repertoires of poetry that exist, and that I used to define my first version of the domain model. So they came to Madrid, they came to a room, I did a mapping of the database that they have with the domain model that I have defined, okay? So they knew that property X was property epsilon of my model, okay? Then I had a testing sheet, another Excel file, where I organized every sheet. I put different sheets. Every sheet was a different domain, so an entity in their model. They knew the correspondence, and in every sheet I had the property name of my model, and I asked them to fill the values. Okay, for instance, a book, they will have to put the title and the number of pages and the century of, because here we have dates with centuries, not before, not after, and things like that. Or another sheet with author, and then it's not author, it's person, because we can have authors, we can have editors, we can have scribes, we can have copyists, translators. We have all kinds of persons in the data, and then in the end of all the properties, I would put the relations. I didn't call it object properties, okay? I called it relations between the entities. Many of the relations expressed semantics of what type of action the person had, what type of role a person had on that context. For instance, the person was a scribe. Okay, so a person is a scribe of a book, for instance. So they were filling the form like that. The key for me, it was not easy for them, but the key was really the mapping I gave to them. So and added to that, I also gave them a diagram with my model, only with the entities and the relations. And I gave them also, for each delegate, a diagram of their own databases in my terms, meaning what they called author in their databases, now in the main model it's called author. So I used my terms, and the sheet would give the mapping, right? And that was when they saw the diagram of their own database in my terms, then it was easier for them. So I don't know if I explained well.
I think yes. Thank you.
Okay.
We have to finish. We are close to the time, to the deadline time. So Mariana, I want to thank you very much for this interesting webinar. I want to thank the audience for having attended and for having participated with questions that were so important for everybody to understand better some specific parts of the webinar. And well, I hope to have you here next month again. So see you in 1 month.
Thank you, Mariana and Anna, for today's webinar. And for those still here, this is just to let you know that today's webinar has been recorded and will be sent to you within 48 hours of today's live recording. And you will get a link to the recording and a link to the PowerPoint presentation in a follow-up email, so please keep an eye out for that. And today's webinar will also be broadcast in Portuguese on the 31st, so please go on the ACES website or the DCMI website to register for that as well. All right, thank you and have a great day.
Okay.
Hi, Mariana.
Oh, can I talk?
Yes, you can.